Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Coming out of the pandemic, more and more students are experiencing some kind of learning loss and or being diagnosed with some form of learning disability. As families try to get support for their children, school districts are making difficult decisions in terms of providing the necessary resources and addressing other concerns faced within the district. Of course, parents and caregivers don't want to hear that budgets may have to be cut in the area of related services, but they also may not be totally aware of their rights when advocating for children with learning disabilities. One possible solution to fill in the gaps in services is our educational system known or utilizing AI technology. While it sounds like a scary proposition, our next guest explains just why AI is just the next and necessary step in the evolution of support services. Dr. Koro Ho is a renowned linguist expert with over 30 years of fieldwork on language disorders and served on the editorial board of the National Association for Gifted Children. She joins us in the classroom today to discuss how her AI system, DYSOLVE, will help fix dyslexia and other learning disabilities. Dr. Ho, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you, Kevin.
I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of parents and caregivers that are not necessarily aware of their rights when it comes to special education and what they can actually secure for their children because the schools are giving them one message and their friends are giving them another. What are the actual, parameters that parents can actually go and not only request, but really demand for their children?
If parents suspect that there is a disability, just suspect it, then they can request an evaluation at any time. That is their right. However, in reality, an evaluation right now with traditional methods is very laborious. It's one-on-one with a specialist, and schools don't have enough specialists to cater to all the students who need this kind of evaluation. That's part of the problem. So when you consider the calendar year versus the school year is very short, and there are so many interruptions coming for Christmas and spring breaks and all that. So what happens is that we find with families in New York, they get pushed, to meet that request the next year and the next year and the next year, and it doesn't happen. And that's why we wrote a book called Dyslexia Dissolved, and most of the cases in there are from New York, and those were the parents who couldn't get any service for their children. So when it comes to dyslexia, which is a very common reading difficulty affecting at least 1 in 5 children, then you find that barely half of them get any kind of support in schools.
Now, it's amazing that you say that 1 in 5, 20% of our student population is probably or should be diagnosed with dyslexia. And now, of that number, how many are actually diagnosed, or would that number actually be higher if we actually had the formal testing of the students?
Only a fraction of them get diagnosed with it. But, more than that may get some kind of support, at different levels to different degrees. And so this is not something that seems to be standardized in terms of, being able to identify all the children correctly and then provide the appropriate intervention. So that's also against the, the federal mandate as well. And so that's a reality, right? So there's a lot of struggling and hardship and, families just trying to look for a solution. But the other thing that you mentioned about rights, even if they know their rights, they don't know it is dyslexia. they don't know what the condition is. So they don't know what to search for.
Well, if that's the case, how do we know that it's dyslexia? Because I guess, are there any quote unquote telltale signs that a child could have is having because of they're having this reading disorder that is attributed to dyslexia? Are there any particular things that the parents and caregivers should be looking out for, or even teachers?
So that's the thing, right? That's a very good question, right, Kevin? But there's no good answer coming from the field because there's no consensus on what dyslexia really is and how to define it in a way that you can measure. That's been the problem so far. And that's why we turn to AI. For us in DYSOLVE, and that's DYSOLVE, for us in DYSOLVE, it's not dyslexia that we have to identify and correct, or compensate for. It's really what's causing the dyslexia, and it has to be language processing inefficiencies in the brain. That is, the brain has trouble processing language. But when we say it's an inefficiency, that means we can identify it and measure it and then correct it. And that's why we have to turn to AI to do that. So then if a parent just suspects that there is some kind of difficulty that the child has, and the child doesn't have to be diagnosed in that very laborious traditional way, then AI can do it very easily, right, without a human specialist. And it takes just about 2 or 3 weeks for the child to just work, and it's a game-based program, so like 15 minutes a day, 3 to 5 days a week. Then you get the evaluation report that tells you which language processes are affected and to what level of severity. So that's a very definite answer that the parent can get this way. And that's why we have AI doing it.
So how long has it really taken you to develop this program? Because I would imagine that obviously it didn't happen overnight, but I guess walk us through the process of when you first thought about using artificial intelligence to your advantage, and about how long it really took for this program to come to fruition.
Right. So AI is now very popular, right? So a lot of people think that that's something that is new, recent. But really, even when I was in grad school, we were looking at AI, but, in a different form from what we're seeing now. So for the past 30 years, from working with children with dyslexia and all sorts of language conditions, then I understand and appreciate the complexity of the problem. And that's why I knew you couldn't have human specialists diagnosing it and then correcting it because of the complexity. Therefore, that's why we turn to AI, right? So 30 years of, a lot of field work, 10 years of developing it. So at the beginning, the students we saw tested prototypes, game prototypes. So they were individual games. That means different kinds of activities for different kinds of language problems. And then we put them all together under an AI platform so that the whole thing is fully automated. And that was completed in 2020. And then, we had the whole school platform available, completed last year.
So, of course, now you have some parents, and I'm sure some educators listening to this, they'll say, oh, Lord, we're going to sit the kids down in front of yet another video screen and have them playing these games. And what is that going to really tell? What is that going to really be able to determine? Because schools now are using certain types of software to help students, I guess, as almost like virtual tutors, but they don't see the benefits, the range of benefits that they were hoping to see. So how is DYSOLVE going to be different from that? How is it really going to accurately diagnose what the problem the child is having, and therefore be able to prescribe the solution to that?
Right. So DYSOLVE is different from all the other programs, right, including the dyslexia screeners, because it works intelligently through the problem. All right. And so this is patented technology that only DYSOLVE has. So what is it that is different about DYSOLVE? DYSOLVE actually doesn't have games sitting there waiting for children to play, right? Because everybody is different, right? Everybody's brain is different. And these processing inefficiencies are scattered in different parts of the brain for each individual. How would you find that? All right. And as a linguist, I know the complexity of the linguistic system. You have to actually cross-reference billions and billions of data points for one person to actually figure out, exactly where the inefficiencies are. So that's why Dissolve doesn't have those games ready, right? Because you need billions and billions of these games all built. So Dissolve only builds each game in real time during gameplay, right? Each game is just done new and it's single use. And when Dissolve finds some problem with the child, Dissolve will make the next game, right, that is somehow related to the one before. And it will keep going like that. Do we have time for me to just explain how it moves intelligently through with one example?
No, definitely, because it really sounds like it's truly an adaptive program. That wherever the student is going, it kind of learns, the programming learns where the student needs to go and guides them in that direction. So it's truly adaptive for them. That's
right. That's why it's one-on-one, right? And it can only be one-on-one if it builds the game during gameplay, right? To decide what to do next. And we don't need screeners. Why? Because every game provides Dissolve AI with new data about the processing weaknesses and strengths of each student.
But yes, please walk us through a particular example if you have one.
Like, for example, even with other screeners, they may ask a child to break up the word cat into single sounds, k-at, right? Because that's needed for spelling, right? So if a child cannot do that, with the old assessment tools or screeners, then the child gets a 0, right? That's incorrect. But Dissolve AI doesn't do that. Dissolve AI looks very carefully of how the child is responding, right? So if the child cannot do the k at the beginning, right, that's a velar plosive, right? A sound that's produced, further back in the oral cavity. So then Dissolve AI will ask the student to do get, g-et, because k and g are produced in pretty much the same region of the oral cavity to see if the child can do that, right? And then Dissolve AI then will decide what to do next. Now, if the child cannot break up the word at all and just says cat, right, as a whole unit without a single sounds, then Dissolve AI will try to find out, right, between the sound and the word, can the child then get to smaller units like subsyllabic units and so forth. So Dissolve AI always thinks intelligently through to figure out what's going on, right? It's like, you can't see what's underneath the water, right, underneath the sea, but you can, probe in this way, in a very indirect way, to figure out the landscape.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is renowned linguistics expert and co-founder of the AI system Dissolve, designed to fix dyslexia and other learning disabilities, Dr. Koro Ho. Now, this all sounds really wonderful and tremendous, and it's like the quick fix to everything we need to do. But it also sounds quite expensive. I mean, when we're talking about technology here and creating an individualized experience for the student, and is going to be adaptive to what they're thinking and their needs and all that, and diagnosing a linguistic problem and fixing the brain patterns and all of that. So it sounds very labor intensive, very expensive. But you're shaking your head because it's not. So explain.
No, it's not, because, AI is highly scalable, right? You can offer it to millions and it doesn't increase operating expenses for us. And we can actually provide all the evaluations and all the interventions immediately to millions of children. And, right now in New York, when we calculate how much schools are spending on special education now, it's over $20,000 per pupil a year.
Wow.
Dissolve only costs 1% of that. Right now, it's just $1,000 per student a year. And we have to remember, too, with traditional interventions, students don't get out of special education because, the interventions have not been able to get them to passing state tests, if we use that as a measure, right? But even back when we were just beta testing Dissolve, we were able to get middle schoolers from under the 25th percentile to above the 50th percentile in 1 to 2 years. And in fact, a lot of the students went on to be honor students in high school. And so they're coming forward now, Kevin, telling the stories to the media because they're now college students. And so if you can do that very quickly, right, within 1 to 2 years, rather than keep the child in special education for 10 years, think about the total cost of it.
Yeah, no, that sounds like that's a game changer, because if you're thinking about just from the overall gains, academic gains that these students are experiencing, if they're going from let's say a third grade reading level, and then now as a fifth grader at a third grade reading level, and by the time they graduate from middle school, they're actually on track or beyond. In that, you're talking about in that 3-year period, they've gained 6 grades. So that's amazing.
Yes, and that's what we find, right? Because in a way, we're changing the brain, we're changing how efficient it works. And because language processing is a big part of what we do every day, it makes a big difference. And the children tell us this, that it's as if the weights are taken off their ankles and they can run. They couldn't run before. And then you have all these behavioral problems going with it, right? Because the brain just shuts down at some point if it's just consuming too much energy and too much effort to try to make sense of language.
Now, of course, you have the old school way of doing things, and the proponents of what we do currently as far as using the science of reading and structured literacy and phonics interventions and so forth. Why aren't those working? We tend to believe that those are the tried and true methods of getting people to regain whatever it is that they've lost and to help with their reading disabilities. But why aren't those things actually really helping our students?
They work for typically developing children, right? But when the brain doesn't process language that way, you cannot use the same method. You cannot just do it longer or more intensively. And that's why the students tell us that phonics, for example, doesn't make sense. They cannot process language. So you can teach them the same thing year after year and it's not sinking in. Now, teachers hesitate to say it because I'm pretty sure they're noticing that the students don't get it. But teachers worry whether somebody would say that they're not doing something with high fidelity, right? They're not doing it the way it's supposed to be done. And we've only so far met one group of teachers in Kansas, and they were honest. They say, it doesn't work. Now they're coming forward and say, it doesn't work. And so I want teachers to understand that this is not because of them, right? It's just that the method doesn't work for children who are not developing typically. All right. And so we need another kind of science. All right. And it's just that the science is not there. It's not out there, right? We're finding a lot of new data about the brain generated by Dissolve AI, right? So that's where we need to turn to see how these brains actually process language.
And it's amazing that in education, the one field that kind of introduced or kind of made differentiation a household word, because they always say that you have to differentiate for all the students you have in your class and all the different learning styles in the class. They kind of forgot that, okay, when you're diagnosing people, you also have to differentiate, right? Because you can't just prescribe the same solution to everybody who comes in with a particular problem because they don't have the same problem. And that's what we've been doing for the last 100 or so years with using all these different reading programs and phonics programs and things, just thinking, okay, it has to be this, so we're going to use this, and not knowing that, well, no, the problem is a little bit different because this child is different, so we have to come up with something different. And I guess that's what DYSOLVE is actually doing for us.
And what we find too, that DYSOLVE AI isn't just correcting the problem. DYSOLVE AI is revealing to us how these brains actually work. But then what's amazing is how fast they work, how fast they can change. All right. And I'll just mention one example because I'm quite excited about it. In New York State, we went into an alternative high school where the students are just waiting to age out.
Yep.
They're not even assigned a grade. And so for all these years, nothing has helped them. And one student, right, a couple of students are in there using DYSOLVE, right? One student really, really wants to really see a change in his ability to read. And then after 1 month of DYSOLVE, he is changing because now he wants to read. Most of them just resist reading. They don't want to do it, right? Because it's just too hard, right? So just that change tells us something, that it is no longer as difficult as it was before. Now we're waiting for that to show up in standardized assessments. And this is how we measure our success, by not our own internal measures, which we have, but by school measures, right? The state testing, right? The regular assessments that you run in schools. That's how we measure the change for us. So I think it is important because you're in Long Island and one district actually did come to us, right? But then always, they just back out of it because they think that if it's a new program, it's more work for them, right, to change how they operate. But just remember, this is AI. It's completely non-intrusive because you don't even need to train teachers or even have teachers do it with students. The students just log in and do it. So it's different from traditional education programs because they've done a lot of online programs and they know that it does take work for the others. But a principal who joined said that this is completely non-intrusive, and it is.
And I think the concern or the trepidation that schools and districts may have with using a program like this right now is not necessarily the level of training that may be involved. I think the excuse that they use is there isn't enough research yet. There's not enough data for them to look at yet to see the effectiveness of the program, right? So I think that's where they're coming from. Although, again, I just think it's just an excuse because they don't want to be the first to go into using this and then it not give them the results that they were looking for. And then now you have all the school boards and the PTAs and everything coming down on the administration because they, quote unquote, wasted money, although the amount of money they're spending is like you said, is a fraction of what they would have been spending. So they're actually saving money. So I think that's where the trepidation is, that there isn't enough of the research just yet, enough data points for them to point to. Talk to us a little bit about that. How often has this actually been utilized?
Right. So I can answer that in two ways. One is to show the people who have actually gone through that and succeeded, right? The case studies, right? Going back to 2017 when we first started testing, right? And now, our clinical trial has been going on since 2022. We started a clinical trial in schools in 8 states, now 9, and the trials are not run by us, independently by a university research team. And we're using state testing and the ones that are used in schools like MAP, and STAR, the reading assessments. And even though the results are preliminary at this point, then we see that they are trending in our favor in a positive direction. All right. And in fact, some of the students have already gone to passing state tests already after just a few months. And so the trajectory is similar to what we've been seeing historically.
I think that's what we need to really focus on. We need to because anything we try out is going to be new. And when we start thinking about AI, artificial intelligence, everything we do in this field right now, is going to be brand new. And until we finally get some regulations in place to kind of reel it in, but everything we experience is going to be completely new. We don't know what to expect just yet. So it's almost like, you jump in and you just hang on for the ride and see where it goes. And if it doesn't work out exactly as planned at first, then you make some tweaks here and there so that you can do it. What's this old saying? In order to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, right? So I think that's the approach that we should be taking, especially if it's a fraction of what any normal testing is going to cost us.
And besides, what has been the outcome of the old methods? You have students failing over and over again, and so many lives have been lost because of that, it just makes me think about legislation now in New York, right, when it comes to a bill that's going through about dyslexia education, right? And I just worry because the language in there does not accommodate AI, right? It's still about training people to do certain things. It's still about using screeners that are not somehow connected to intervention. So what's the point of doing a screening when you're not going to use the results to guide intervention, right? For us, it's always going to be the blueprint for intervention, right? So, and then the old methods that have not been producing results for the past 100 years. So then we can call them evidence-based. I'm a linguist. I'm very careful with words, right? So when people hear evidence-based approaches or methods, they think that there's positive evidence, right? That those things work. But look at the reading research. There's not been any. So for students, I should say for students after third grade.
Right. And I want to talk about that for a moment, because if students in third grade, we know that a lot of students are placed into or giving interventions based on their scores after the third grade reading test. And because of those scores, many of them don't get out of special education for the next, 9 years when they graduate from high school. Just talk to me very briefly. Talk to me about the feeling, because we talked about it a little bit before. You alluded to it before, but the feeling that students get when they realize that whatever switch in their brain was now finally turned on because of their use of Dissolve, and they're able to free themselves of that special education mantle. What are the feelings that students get because of that?
Oh my goodness, right? And that's why we describe, the cases fully in the book Dyslexia Dissolved, because it's a whole transformation of the person. But it's not just the individual, it's the whole family dynamics, right? Because, when the family is facing a child with what's supposed to be a disability, I just don't like that word because it's just a difficulty. It saps everybody's energy, and siblings don't get the same amount of attention then, right? And so it really has this very big impact on families. And I see that sometimes it tears families apart. And we have single moms coming to us, right? Because they're the only ones left taking care of it. So when this child finally finds that, this is not that hard, I can do it. I don't have to fight everybody to resist doing it and be embarrassed too at school, right? Their whole outlook changes. They become very adventurous. They want to try new things because it's no longer so overwhelming, right? Excellent. You can't do one thing. You don't want to take on anything else that's new. It's just too much on the system, right? And so that's why they change completely as a person.
And wow. And so it sounds like, again, it's a game changer. And we would certainly like to thank our guest today, renowned linguist, expert, and co-founder of the AI system Dissolve, designed to fix dyslexia and other learning disabilities, Dr. Coral Ho, for coming on to our show today.
Thank you, Kevin.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.